We're here again with Peter Lakatos and joined by my co-host Daniel Palsson. So yeah, a few topics that really delve into the relationship between breathing and performance. One is functional movement, and how, the question is, can you have functional movement without having functional breathing? Is it a mistake for people to focus solely on just movement without any consideration of the breath? And especially when we are going to learn that they're very much intertwined. And Peter Lakatos, and I'll ask Peter just to introduce himself. He's a very interesting character. I've met Peter quite a number of times. I've went over to Budapest, we've done trainings, and I know that you have a black belt in martial arts, Peter. I think you have. I'm pretty sure you have.
Yes, sir.
You're also a background in BJJ, and you've also coached elite not rescue, but bodyguards and different forces, etc. So this is about all things breath in terms of performance. So Peter, just why are you interested in the breath, by the way? What was your background? How did you come across it?
Yeah, so my background, and first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's really humbling to be your guest. So, and I mean it. No, I mean it. So my background is a professional athlete. I was playing European handball. I'm just saying European because for Americans, it's a different sport. So it's a team handball as they know it. And quite frankly, breathing for me, that was, as an athlete, it was just keep breathing. That was all the instructions we got from coaches. Try to do it without it, right? There was no instructions, there were no screening, there was pretty much nothing. And the first thing was that I started to really think about breathing was through FMS, what you mentioned, which is Functional Movement System by Lee Burton and Gray Cook. And Brett Jones, who's one of the founder, he was talking about breathing, and it was a very interesting context because in FMS what we do, we have 7 screens. These are movement screens, and we try to figure out and filter out, let's say, not so good quality movements, to figure out what is not the baseline for movement and what is good, what is not so good, what needs to be corrected, and if you have any pain. So we try to put everything in different buckets. So anyway, Brett Jones told me about 9-10 years ago, oh, Peter, why don't you do, before you make some corrections, let's say shoulder mobility or something else, why don't you give them a minute of breathing exercise? Just put them on their stomach, put the hand under the forehead, called crocodile breathing, and just make them sure that they breathe through the nose. Maybe put a book on the lumbar, so they have to deep breathe, and then rescreen them. And I'm like, oh, that's very interesting. So I did, because I'm teaching these certifications, and I asked the people, first measure the shoulder mobility behind your back, and just notice by centimeters how big is the distance between the two hands. Do the exercise, which is the breathing. It's about 1 minute breathing, deep breathing, crocodile breathing, and then let's see what's the difference, and then we measure. So it's very measurable if you think about it. And it's just 1 minute. And my surprise, 90% of the people put their hands up when I asked them, so how many had positive change after 1 minute breathing? It was 90%. And in my opinion, if it's 90%, we buy it. We should. That's pretty high level, right? So I was like, that doesn't make any sense. So that was my first thing. Okay, I'm very convinced this breathing stuff is working. I just don't know how. I don't know why. But I cannot, there are things but what you've seen, now you cannot unseen ever. So this 90%, you've seen it. And then you're like, okay, so what is that? And this is when I started to have to read and search for sources. And this is how I found your book. And a couple of years later, you've been in our house and having a dinner.
Yeah, it's amazing, and it's been amazing that it's been overlooked, but now there's definitely a greater awareness of breathing. That's very interesting. You had people lie on their front they were lying face down, resting on their hands, and you put the book just at the diaphragm area, just on the lower back.
Mm-hmm.
And the objective was that as they breathed in, that the book was rising. Correct. So as the diaphragm was moving downwards, you've got movement to the back, movement to the front, and movement to the sides.
Yes.
Yeah, I wonder why you had them lie in their front as opposed to lying in supine position.
So, okay, so I can answer this question, or at least I'm trying to answer. So I can put them on the back. And the great thing when I put them on the back is very simple. It will put the spine in a neutral position, right? Especially if they are able to pull their legs up, because many people, when their legs are straight, they open up like this. And this is basically, like they live in the breathing in position, if it makes sense, right? Yeah. So, and this is the problem when we talk about, and this is from Yanda, and he called this open scissor syndrome, right? So basically, if you are in this position, all the shear forces are on your lumbar 2 and 3, which is not the best. So basically, I can put them on the back. But here comes another subset or phenotype of postural problems. So one of them is, we call them the ski jumper because then people can remember, right? This is a typical ski jumper position. The other guy is the caveman, right? A typical, I'm sorry to be not PC, but a typical bodybuilder, let's say, like the person who has also just have Monday and Wednesday, which is chest and arm, right? So they are in this position. So if I put this guy on his back, there is no force to make him open. But if I put them on the stomach, then in this position, I have to extend them. And then I start to make them breathe. So all the muscles start to relax around the spine. The diaphragm gets to basically invited into this whole working process. So finally, the diaphragm is doing what it should do. And then again, when they stand up, they look, these guys, they definitely look taller when they get up. So the posture is changing. And again, it's just simply when somebody walks to my room, sometimes I don't have time to screen them, to do the full screen. So I just do 1 or 2 screens with them. Let's say the shoulder mobility is very telling. And then based on the posture, I already know where I'm going to put them for breathing, right? And then I take a picture of them as they put the hand behind them, breathing, after, picture, and then show them like, okay, so your reach in 1 minute gained about 15 to 20 centimeters, which is very normal. And then they are like, whoa, this is amazing. I want more of this.
That's cool.
What's very interesting, Daniel. Peter, you're talking about hunching over. And as an old tennis player, well, not even old tennis players, but tennis players in general, they have this, and I have too much. So you're almost, this is your natural position. So that's very interesting, actually.
Well, one of the problem is in most sports that they practice so much the given sport. And this is, again, not from me, it's from Brad Jones. They start to live in the sport posture. Like the boxer, they start to live in the fighting stance. So like shoulder forward, head chin is down because protecting the chin. So you will see pretty much most of the sports, they start to live in the posture. And that is one of the reasons that, when somebody comes to us and says, like, I want to have some kind of safe fitness tip, what am I supposed to do? It would be great to give them bicycling because it's safe if you think about it. But if you sit already 12 hours a day at the desk, you are basically just making that bad posture stronger if you're going to do bicycling, let's say 2 hours a day extra. So it's always the risk benefit ratio. And in this case, risk is very low on the knee and hip and ankle and spine because you're bicycling, but the posture is very high risk. So probably it's not the best for you.
But even bicycling, I would say, if you lean over, your diaphragm will be harder to move that, especially since you're cycling for hours on end sometimes. So,
so I think leaning forward, it's in this position because you are conserved in a very strong flexion, probably for hours. Probably it's a horrible idea by any standard. Now also, so when we'd have, like, let's say a team handball game, and there are switches, the players, right? So one player comes down with probably like 180 beats per minute heart rate, and they have to sit down, right? Because that's the rule. Just like in ice hockey, you have to sit down if you leave the court. We always emphasize them to put your elbow on your thigh, making sure that you have straight back, not round back, but you are resting your upper body, your torso on your legs. And we measured with heart rate monitors. And here comes a very interesting thing what we saw. The moment when we, because the diaphragm has at least two, but many more duties. One of them is respiration, but the other is to stabilize the spine. So, but when you are above your anaerobic threshold, it's very difficult to decide for the brain which one is most important. Of course, respiration will be more important because that's survival. So then when you sit down and you give some support for your upper body, now that the diaphragm can just focus on one thing, and one thing only, respiration. So heart rate drops almost like 2 times faster. So it's crazy. It's a small trick, but that's what we use for players.
Can you go through that again, Peter? Sorry. I think that's really, really important. So say, for example, you've got an MMA fighter, and it's just 1 minute, isn't it? Is the rest in between rounds. So yes. His or her heart rate is ramped up. So they're sitting on the stool. Is there anything that they can do while sitting on the stool, or does it have to be a specific purpose kind of?
So if you don't mind, I would switch a little bit, because I'm probably a lot less experienced in MMA, but probably more in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I give you an interesting point of view, which is very similar to judo. That, you know, many times they have to check the clothing and retie the belt. So then you have to turn around, you go to the sizer position, and you have to, again, you know, do the whole thing. And this is what we found like a very good opportunity, first of all, to go down with your heart rate and changing the acidity of your blood. So in this case, what we do with our fighters is very simple. You turn around and you start to hyperventilate, of course, because right now you have very high level of acidity and you have some time. So they very slowly, but surely they tie their belt, they put everything in the right order, they stand up, they show they are ready, so they will get the GMA. And then most likely in that time, acidity is starting to get lowered, but also heart rate. And we do the same thing if there is a break. In Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, there's no break, so there are 5 seconds, 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minutes. Black belts are 10 minutes fights. So there, your only chance is basically when your belt is fallen or your jacket is out, and then you have chance to, you know, win some time and get rested.
I'm just wondering as well, so they're taking full big breaths, but I'm sure they're breathing low, so it's improving alveolar ventilation. Mm-hmm. Do you do anything with the exhalation? Do you kind of slow down the exhalation at all to stimulate the vagus nerve towards the end?
Yeah. So at the end, we start to do, if it's possible, we do like 30, 40, relatively fast breathing, which normally would probably make you pass out. In normal life, but here it's not going to happen because your CO2 is very high, hydrogen ions are very high, acidity is definitely very high, and then start to slow down your breathing as you're turning back, and especially because of the parasympathetic tone, you try to bring it back. Yes.
Yeah, it's an interesting take. It's always, I suppose, yeah, just for people listening in, if you normally were to do 20 or 30 breaths, you could bring on lightheadedness. And even with the physical exercise, the carbon dioxide in the blood, it's even though the metabolism can be generating so much CO2, so there's a higher production. So what you're saying is the higher production of carbon dioxide, you get away with doing the hyperventilation, that you're not going to feel so it's a great, yeah, this is going to be an interesting one. I know we were bringing it in, and I don't think we looked into it enough in detail. And this is all things good about breathing. You know, there's so many different, it's getting it down into the fine details. So yeah,
it's interesting, Peter, with your buy-in. You know that you in any sport I think you have to find various ways for athletes to accept it. And in general, I would say individual athletes are more accepting to try new things and with breathing. And if you take martial arts, it seems to be a much higher acceptance rates within martial arts. And I think is it due to tradition that it's already from when you start off, or what we say, why, compared to team sports?
First of all, yeah. So first of all, I think because of the traditionally most martial arts come from Asia, and in Asia, breathing was also part of the different kind of religious practices. So I would say that must be one of the reasons. So not just the performance part, but also the probably what they were talking about that. And I'm not expert on that level. All my connections to China is my wife is Chinese, so that's the maximum. But they talk about the qi and the energy and everything. So and breathing was always part of it, as I read all these literatures. But the other thing is the experience. So especially if it's somehow related to wrestling type of movements, you very soon will understand how important is your breathing, because simply the amount of pressure on you, the amount of acidity you have to deal with is so ridiculous. And it works vice versa. So we have sometimes kickboxers, Muay Thai fighters, boxers come to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and high level, and then they feel they die after 1 minute because simply the acidity is so high. And they never met with that type of pressure. And of course, if you go to boxing training, they will beat us up. So it goes vice versa. But again, here comes one of the typical answer probably nobody likes to hear, that it depends. Because again, hyperventilation, when somebody asks me that, what do you think about hyperventilation? I will say it depends. And they're like, what do you mean? Well, if you are above anaerobic threshold, and you're trying to get your breathing, dialed in, probably hyperventilation is a good idea. It's controlled, it's limited in time. And the moment when you reach a certain level, you stop it, right? Now, but hyperventilation, when you are just sitting and doing nothing, well, you're better sitting because you might have so much lightheadedness that you might even pass out. So probably then it doesn't make much sense, according to me. I'm not saying I know everything, but that would be my opinion.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting, because when you mix different sports, I think Patrick and I spoken about this a lot. I think you have to be very specific for that sport, because if you talk to an athlete in whatever sport, it has to be dialed into that sport, and especially now when you have, like you were saying in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I think when it was black belt, was it 10 minutes and no pause?
No break.
No break, which is completely different from a 4-hour tennis match in a Grand Slam when you have multiple breaks. You have between the points in the changeover, so you have the time to come down. But it's it's all about endurance versus something that it's very, very intense. But breathing is still important in both those instances. But you have to prepare in different ways, and what you can do during the actual competition is different. So that's why I think there's not one size fits all, because you have to adapt it to this specific sport. So in tennis there's always this pause of 90 seconds, so you can always go from that 25 seconds in between points. But if you're 10 minutes in a competition in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, how do you think about your breathing before then? How do you prepare? What would you say to somebody who's going into competition?
So again, and this is again not my idea. This is mainly from Patrick, but what we use normally is very simple. We do if it's competition, of course. So we're gonna do the relaxation breathing probably 1 or 2 hours prior, even 30 minutes prior the event, and then about 10 minutes prior we're gonna do strong breath holds to have the splenic effect. Mm-hmm. And hopefully we did our homework before, so we did everything else prior, but these are just the last fine tuning of the system. And then naturally before we start, probably we're gonna do some 4-6, meaning the rhythmic breathing. So 4 in, 6 out to calm the mind, because no matter how strong they are, how experienced they are, nobody is completely relaxed before they go to a fight. That's impossible. I mean, even in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, where there's a very little chance that you will have some serious damage on the body. But imagine the same thing with cage fighting, where you have no idea what's the outcome. I mean, seriously, very little chance you can project the fight that you will go without injuries or even surgeries. So then I think even the risk is higher. And in my eyes, the highest risk definitely be the first responders, so meaning SWAT units and everything, because then you don't even know if you go home. So that's a third level of very high level risk.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, like, coming back to your question, Daniel, why warriors of old tended to focus on the breath, it just kind of makes total sense, because it's not just about training the body, but it's also about training the mind. You can imagine a fighter who goes into a ring and that person has their attention all stuck in their head. Or you can imagine a fighter who goes into the ring and their attention is fully engaged in what they are doing. But Peter, I know you're working with your athletes in terms of improving concentration and focus and attention span. Is it something that normally happens? Because we all have attention to different and varying degrees. Some of us have very poor attention span. That was me 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Others have it pretty well. They have a natural ability to have a very good attention span. Our education system hasn't taught us how to improve it. And it's a totally different story if you're sending a fighter out and if they're going to be distracted by the least thing, or if they're so stuck or distracted with all of the thoughts going through the minds. Mm. So they'll have external distractions and they have internal distractions. What do you go through? You know, my question, I suppose, is, do all fighters focus on training their mind? Is it something that's happening, and the breath as a good gateway into doing that?
So in my opinion, that most of the fighters and most of the athletes of any kind, basically, for them, breath training is not part of the daily routine. And while we try to focus, and we like to focus on performance with these guys, but when you make a step back, you will figure out most of them are snoring. Most of them has probably borderline sleep apnea. Their regeneration is definitely horrible. So even though if they spend enough time in the bed, most likely they are not sleeping. So, and these are the guys that Olympic level, swimmers, water polo. So I worked with these guys, and I was always shocked that their breathing was similar to the civilian counterparts. Like there was no difference in breath holding times, either the steps exercise or the bolt score. It was very similar. And one of the thing was, when I was working with a high level water polo team, women, I asked them, as I was trying to break the ice. So I asked them that, okay, so how many of you are snoring? And they were very offended. And they said, like, no, we are women. We are not snoring. And I was like, okay, all right, got it, good. And I was like, okay, so when you go to training camps, are you in pairs, right, in the room? And they said, yes. I was like, okay, so put your hand up if your partner is snoring. So everybody put up the hands. I was like, so, okay, so how does it work? Like, nobody's snoring, but everybody's partner is snoring, so everybody's snoring. And they were like, yeah, pretty much. But and then some started to like defend themselves. Yeah, but only when we are tired. I'm like, okay, when was the last time you were not tired? I mean, these are like highest level players. And they're like, well, yeah, that's a good point. So, and just, again, ask them to how many of you have or using often nose drops. And it's, again, high level players, handball, water polo, it doesn't really matter. I never counted less than 20-25% of these athletes.
Which is reflective of the population. It's around 30%
so again,
of the population with rhinitis. And I suppose then the connection then, Peter, is if they're using nose drops or if there's a tendency towards a stuffy nose, they've got an increased risk of sleep disorder breathing. So what you're saying is it's pretty much across all walks of life. An interesting comment you made with regards to SWAT guys. And the guy yesterday I was working with elite police as well. And, in terms of the application of breathing exercises to upregulate, to downregulate, to, you can imagine going into a scenario that you're absolutely ramped up and everybody is going to be ramped up, especially if the outcome, it could be as drastic as losing a life. That's that's another level entirely. When you're teaching the breathing exercise to downregulate, you spoke about the 4 seconds in and 6 seconds out. Is that something that you normally prescribe? I think it's a pretty good one to do. I think it's a great one for stimulating the vagus nerve.
Yes. So I think that the difficulty for these groups of people is the very fact that you have no idea what's going to happen. So you can only rely on your knowing that you had the best training possible and you have the best team possible. And you have to basically hang on these two facts. And if you don't trust any of those, meaning your training or your group of people, your confidence level is so low, so you're definitely gonna make some mistake. That's my experience from talking to many of these and working some of these units. And if we just step back one, we know that, and I don't know how exact is the study, but now they talk about we have 6,200 thought worms per day, and most likely over 80% of them are just repetitive and useless and just full of fear. So just as an interesting point, I was working with a special unit in Israel, and I asked them about this, like, okay, so how do you deal with all these things? And they said, well, very important to understand best team, best training. And when I go in, everything is under my control. That is what I try to do the best way possible. Everything but is under not my control, I don't even think about it, because then it would just take my attention away. And he said, if we succeed, that's a teamwork. If I die, that's not my problem anymore anyway. That's what they said. So I'm just quoting. And I was like, okay, that's very interesting. So, and the funny thing is that if you go out with them to have a dinner, lunch, coffee, whatever, they are the most relaxed people, because they always like, my work is just crazy.
Yeah.
And compared to that, what might happen here? Nothing. I mean, compared to that stress level, this is nothing. So if the waitress is not giving you the warm food, it's a little bit, not as warm, whatever. Like, what's the conflict here? That is basically nothing compared to what I'm dealing with every day.
Yeah.
So that's what I see first of all. And I also remember when especially I asked one AI Yanilov, who is my teacher in Krav-Maga, and he told me a story, and I don't know if it's true, but that's what he told me, that Imi Lichtenfeld, who was the founder of Krav-Maga, he was part of the team. He was preparing that special Mossad unit to catch Adolf Eichmann, right? I believe in Argentine. And some of the exercises, again, I'm saying what I was heard, but one of the exercises was because they had to spend a lot of time in a car and waiting for the right time to catch the guy. And they said Imi was teaching them special breathing exercises, because when you have to go, you have to sprint and catch the guy,
Mm.
But before that, you have to be amazingly calm. And he very early figured out that even if he teaching them the best techniques, if they are not relaxed, they cannot recall all the information they studied. So, and it totally makes sense, to be honest.
Totally, totally. Well, if we're ramped up in a fight or flight response, the body has only got one motive, and that's survival. That's to get the hell out of there. It's not about recalling information, and that's where down regulation. And these guys, like, they're focusing. They have to have 100% focus, maybe for 1 hour at a time, maybe 2 hours, maybe 3 hours, maybe more. Like, you can imagine a normal individual trying to maintain that focus. They're going to be lost in daydreams. Their mind is going to be all over the place. And yet these guys can't afford that opportunity, because if they miss that timing. Just to have one more question before Daniel comes in. In terms of the guys that when you were talking to, if we were to measure their stress levels, do you think that their stress levels are high? Do you think they've got a good balance in the autonomic nervous system? Do you think that it has been their training, and whether there's a role for breath work in terms of putting a stress on them to make them more resilient to achieve a better balance of the autonomic nervous system? So I know there's a couple of questions there, but...
I think, regarding to the human body, pretty much everything is a skill. Yes. So if it's a skill, then it's trainable. And I think that's what they do. First of all, when you ask them about whatever they can say about what happened, but let's say they can say the way they talk about it, like kids are talking about hide and seek. For them, it's fun. And that drives me nuts, to be honest, because this is something that we would definitely freak out. And again, I was working with some of the units, and they have the so-called tactical house, when they can shoot either with live ammo or simunition, which is almost like paintball, but a lot more painful. And we use this basically, and they have to do a task. They have to go from room to room, catch somebody. So there's a task. And there is always a group of people, they're monitoring them. Probably there are cameras, and they have probably HR monitor on them. So it depends on, what level we are talking, how much money we are talking about. But it was very interesting. So they know it's a training. They exactly know this is not a live weapon. And nothing is risky right now. And even though in that case, we measured sometimes 200, 210 beats per minute. So that was super crazy. So when I first saw that, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like an Olympic level 800 meters at the end. They completely acidic, completely blocked. I mean, really like tunnel vision, like crazy. And the reason we have cameras in these rooms are very simple, because then we ask them what happened. And this is where the surprise comes, because according to what happened, really, objectively, is two different stories. And it can be so different. Some people said, I shot 3 times, blah, blah, blah. And then we could prove on a video that you never pulled the trigger. So, and that was not a high stress, and this was elite unit. I mean, not elite, it was sub-elite unit yet.
Yeah.
So it's amazing that how much stress it can be, even in training environment. So it's hard to imagine what is real life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, would that be? I asked you a question before, Peter, about the preparation, and we do the same thing, of course, because it's from Patrick. Would you do the down regulation a few hours before to reduce anxiety and upregulate? But if you take 2 different sports, and for the sake of argument, you take Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, no pauses, high intensity for 10 minutes. You don't know the outcome. I don't know if you can end it before 10 minutes, and then you have a tennis match for 4 hours. Should you shift, because you may be anxious in different ways, should you have more or less of the down regulation versus the up regulation, depending on the type of intensity, time of duration of the actual competition? Because I'm just assuming going into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the anxiety levels could be very high. So what would you recommend 2 different sports like that?
So first of all, the most important part, we have to understand those sports. We don't have, as a coach, I don't have to understand as much as a tennis coach, but I have to understand the physiology of the sport, the challenge of the sport. Even from the typical injuries, overuse injuries of the sport, typical movements of the sports, the demand of the sports. This is how far I have to go. And I would never teach them tennis because that doesn't make any sense. But understanding that how many sprints, I give you an example. Okay, so probably this will help. I was hired like 4 years ago for a Division I handball team as a strength coach. So I sat down with the head coach and I asked him, so what is the tactics for the year? And he said, like, why we are brand new in Division I want to surprise the league. So the way we purchase the players, the extra players, are pretty fast. And I want to play fast games. And I was like, that's a good, you're already helping me. So tell me how many sprints you are buying here. And he said about 60, 65 sprints per player. I'm like, cool. So that's how we're going to train. So I had 3 months. And our focus was basically, especially with the wings, to make sure that they are able to make that many sprints in a very high speed. And again, as a fresh team, we became 4th in the league that year. So that was pretty amazing. That was really surprising because simply what we were focusing on sprints and again, breathing. So that was another thing that was difficult to sell to the head coach, that we were doing the maximum breath hold exercises. We were doing the 40-meter sprints with breathing out and just all out basically. And so because at the beginning, everybody was like, oh, that's pretty crazy. I've never seen this before. But that was, again, we could measure because, we could see the bolt score of the average was 17 second preseason. And after the preparation, it was about 25. So that was pretty good. And then we could measure the steps. Again, steps was about 45 average. Then it went up to above 80 average. So again, it was really good. So we knew that they can repeat the sprints. And the same way I'm working with Division I football players, who they come to me with, again, about 15 to 17 seconds of ball score. And now we are about 40 normally with some of them. And the maximum breathlessness test it was about 52. And now one of my players is 106, which is pretty good. And it's funny that it's not my job to make them faster sometimes, but how many times they can be fast is my job. Meaning they are pretty fast, but as they're getting more acidic because of the load, so this is a kind of an answer to your question, then they start to slow down. But if they can handle more acidity or remove hydrogen ions faster, whatever, or buffering better the hydrogen ion, then we bought them more sprints. And suddenly, and this is true story with this player, he was the 3rd slowest guy, and he became the 5th fastest guy in the team within less than a season, like 6 months. And again, he was fast already on some degree, but repetitive sprint ability, which is in tennis, in volleyball, basketball, handball, football, is the number 1 skill besides the sport-specific skill that is very difficult to improve without breathing exercises, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree. It makes total sense. And it makes total sense to add an extra load onto the person's breathing. As you were talking about, take a normal breath in and out, pinch your nose, hold, and sprint for 40 meters with a breath hold. And we do a departure every 30 seconds. Like those, it's very taxing. And, sometimes when you're working with players and they're thinking that breathing is it's a load of nonsense. And then you put them through this, they soon change their tune, but they feel it. Their legs are going jelly. Mm-hmm. They feel that you're really pushing the boundaries, but we're doing it within safe limits to get those adaptations.
Yes.
And even at this level, Peter, you know, if an athlete achieves 0.5% improvement, and it's possible with breathing, because breathing has been the one thing that has been overlooked. So here is an entire state that has the possibility for great potential, but it has been overlooked. So any player who starts just looking at this and bringing it into their existing routine, you know, the possibility is there.
Can I give you one more example? Because that was definitely eye-opening for pretty much everybody. Mm-hmm. And that's what we call nose breathing max exercise. And so we have a lake around, we have a lake next to the handball court, and there is a running court around the lake. So it's pretty nice. Mm-hmm. And what we do with them, because traditionally in handball and football, pre-season, everybody's running like crazy. But to be honest, I'm not so confident to let them run, because some of them are like 100, 105, 110 kilo handball players. Mm. So the mechanical stress is ridiculously high. So I'm kind of hesitant to make them run so much, long steady cardio style. So what we do is we make them walk, right? We even put the tape on if possible. And they are very much partner in it. And we do it very simply. Everybody has their heart rate monitor, and we make them walk around the lake 2 or 3 times. That's about 30 to 45 minutes. And this is pre-season. So they do it 3 times a week. And again, it's nose breathing. So some of them are very fast walking, no running, very fast walking. So the mechanical stress on the knees, the hip, and the spine is minimum, but the breathing is forced through the nose. The mouth is closed, and some of them are walking up themselves to 160 beats per minute, and they keep it, right? So they're very fat, really fit. And then the amazing part is that, because when we started to do that, pretty much everybody's questioned our, you know, sanity. Like they were like, this is not, pretty much nobody's doing this. I'm like, it's either good or bad, we'll see. And turned out it's pretty good, because at the end of the year, not just because of that, but I think because of that too, we have 2 very interesting data came in. Number one, we are in the whole division after finishing the year who had no major injuries whole year, which is in handball, it's unheard of. Mm-hmm. So even the head coach said, like, I never seen anything like that. And the other thing is, through the COVID, and I don't want to claim anything, but we are the team that almost had any COVID illnesses, or none of the postponed games were postponed because our player was sick, but because of the other team players were sick. And I think it's because they became nose breathers, probably because better recovery, the nitric oxide, most possibly a part of it. And again, just the diaphragm got stronger. And I think this is where the money is, probably, that, you know, because the breath holding, most people doesn't understand, most coaches, when we do a breath holding, when we have the first urge, as Patrick is always talking about the first urge. Now, when you have the maximum breathlessness test, it's not the first urge. Mm-hmm. It's you go more beyond. So there is a static or isometric of the diaphragm. It's shaking. It wants to work. You just decide not to. So basically, you isometrically strengthening the diaphragm. Because if it's a muscle, you can train it, right? If it's a muscle, you can give hypertrophy. If it's a muscle, you can put more mitochondria in it, which we know from Russian research, diaphragm, when it gets thicker, have more mitochondria and takes more lactic acid. So basically, whatever you create as lactate, the diaphragm take it as food, as energy substrate, which is pretty amazing. So in this case, I think it's almost like a double whammy, because, you know, they got the nose breathing in, plus the stronger diaphragm, and a stronger and more functioning diaphragm is protecting the spine, And when the spine is protected, everything is protected, because that's what we call the fixed point of the whole body. So compared to that, we can move our arms or legs. If the spine is wobbly, then the whole body goes into startle reflex, and pretty much everything is limited as range of motion.
Yeah.
So that's what we see.
But it makes sense if you do, like you said, 30 to 40 minutes, almost a half a game or half match in handball, in football, that you do it 3 times a week during preseason for, I don't know, was it 6 to 8 weeks, or how many weeks do you do it for?
Yeah, the full thing is 12 weeks, but as we do it for about 4 to 6 weeks at the beginning, and we're fading this out and starts more of sprinting and more of sport specific, like sprinting with balls, and also they have to learn the tactics of the game.
I think because what people don't always think about is that normally everybody on a team is injured at some point, more or less, during the year. And if you're not injured, you can train more and you become fitter. So
exactly what you said is very important, because this is the thing, and I wish more people would say what you said just now. The good athlete is the athlete who shows up on the training. That is the good athlete. And basically the only way we can create high-level athletes when they show up, and they can only show up when they are healthy. So basically, when people are getting damaged, injured, and everything, even though they are very skilled, very talented, unfortunately, at one point, the other guy who is less prone to injury, but willing to put the work in, probably will pass them.
I think it's a great training for handball and football, but if you take a different sport, like maybe Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and boxing, where you can have lighter, maybe that is not as effective. Maybe then you have to adapt it a little bit more intense, shorter, because they train in a different way. But I think for handball, and especially handball, it makes perfect sense, because like you said, they weigh a lot, they're big, so they still get the training. And also with football, for a long, almost like a half match. So it's in time and not exactly the same intensity, but if they can stay fit throughout the season, overall, they become fitter. So that's, again, adapting to the specific sports, which I think is very, very important.
I think there's another point there. I try to see always the game as a way, what is the energy system is overused. So, for example, that a glycolytic system for many sports like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, wrestling, judo, it's overused. Now, we also know that glycolytic system creating a lot of reactive oxygen species. So that means that it's not too healthy. I'm sorry to say that, but when you have, 7 times, twice a day, grappling all out, or crossfitting all out, or high intensity interval training all out, it is not safe, it is not healthy. Because simply we are creating way too much reactive oxygen species, which will create acidity, which will create most likely membrane problems at the mitochondrial level. So many times we try to do the opposite with them, meaning that even in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, this type of walking training is really good, because it's giving you work capacity, giving you capillaries, giving you the foundation, giving you, they call it the cardiac output, meaning you're making the left ventricle bigger. So your heart is getting in a much healthier position when you are doing high intensity interval training, where your heart rate is way high and your heart is just doing this and just getting way too muscular in a bad way, if you go overboard. So we try to create a balanced athlete even on that level of physiology.
How do you, in CrossFit, I can see that you can have the same exercise more or less, and you can nose breathe to stay within more of a healthy range and don't go over the anaerobic threshold. But how do you do that in martial arts? If you actually do, is that, because when you do grappling, like I said, can you actually nose breathe? Is it the same thing? Could you actually go down intensity?
Yeah, so what we do and you have to be a fairly high level in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and we call it flow grappling. So you try to go fairly high speed, but nothing strong. Not you are not eligible to hold more than for 2 seconds. Mm. So it's very much flow. It's smooth. It's you go from position to position. The heart rate could go up, like 160 normally we measure, but it's playful. There is no risk of injury, no risk of losing, no risk of anything basically. And sometimes the guys are doing this for like 30, 40, 50 minutes without stopping, and everybody's all sweaty and everything. But it's a very good exercise to dial in new techniques, but also it's a great fitness exercise.
I'm actually doing an instructor training for the other Oxygen Advantage coaches this week, and it's about finding that anaerobic threshold. So you do 20 seconds, 1 minute of say push-ups or burpees for a couple of minutes, and then you nose breathe, and then you do 30 seconds, and then you 30 seconds, and then you do 40 seconds, and you rest 20 seconds, and you try to see at what point, if at all, do you start mouth breathing, and that's where you know that's where you're going overboard and you're going into a different state. So then you can kind of realize, okay, I can do this every minute for 20 seconds, fine, maybe even 30, but 40 doesn't work. So that is my limit. So that's how you keep your buffering below that. So you know that you can't go above that. So that's one way of finding out.
The way I force it sometimes with our Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu group is simply we take tapes, we put the tape on, and this is how we roll. Yep. And that's kind of like self-limiting solution, because the moment when the tape is on, nobody wants to run like crazy, because they know that there is a price. So they slow down, they start to think, and then suddenly they see things that normally they don't see, because they're much more focused.
That's I know that we're a little bit conscious of time. I think we've gone almost an hour. So many great nuggets here, Patrick. And
for sure, it's been tremendous, Peter. Yeah. It's been really good.
Well, I have a good teacher, sir. That's all I can say. I'm sorry, but that's the fact.
With your work with the functional movement screen, I'm curious to see, of the people that you've tested over the years, what's the percentage of people that you would that they would indicate that they have dysfunctional movement and dysfunctional breathing, and the relationship between the two?
So first of all, functional movement, FMS had like 2 researches at least lately, which was one about the questionnaire part, like comparing the different questionnaires about the Nijmegen, the entitled, and then the 4 questions, which was very relevant to the breath hold time of 25 seconds. So I used that one as a very easy check with everybody. And that's very shocking that I would say a good 75% are failing on one of those questions. So then we measure the breath hold times, it's less than 25. And then we measure the screen test and they are below 14 and they show some asymmetries. So it's very relevant, these 3 measurements. Yeah. That's what I see. And the interesting part is the moment when so now FMS is considering breathing as movement, right? So which is very smart. And they say, like, if you're checking the squat, you should check the breathing too. I mean, what's the big deal? And that's what we do. And then you can see as the breathing improves, let it be the biomechanics of it or the biochemistry of it, there will be a transfer to everywhere. And I just give you a story. I was working with one of the National Center for Handball players, and these are young handball players from 14 and up. So there are like 400 kids, so it's a big academy. I was teaching the teachers Oxygen Advantage, like it was a 1-day short course. And after they knew what they already knew, I asked them, like, okay, so guys, just, out of your mind, I mean, what would be the percentage of the kids here who think they have a problematic breathing? And they said about 75, 80%. I mean, based what we learned now.
Kids who taught it, That's amazing, because usually people have a very poor perception. You know, normally if you say to somebody, your breathing might be a little bit off, or your breathing could do with room for improvement, and they'll typically say, well, my breathing is fine. And people can be quite defensive about their breathing, but yet the kids were very open to it.
No. These were the teachers.
Oh,
and the teachers said about the kids.
Sorry,
Yes.
I picked up wrong.
It's
That's
okay.
amazing.
And no, it was my Hunglish. And then I asked them, like, okay, that's doable. I think it's possible. Now, okay, so let's talk about posture. So what is the percentage you think that these young players, I mean, how many of them have postural issues? And they said, it's about the same. I was like, that's amazing. So now you see these two normally taken independent values. And if you put it together, you think that one is affecting the other. And they're like, no question about it. I'm like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. But it's kind of frightening as well, the instance, and also the fact that it's been overlooked. You know, how many elite, even if we were to not even thinking about recreational, but how many elite athletes are considering their breathing? And surely there, you know, it's really something to be embraced. Where do you see it? And just with the final questions, where do you see it all going? Do you see a future in breathing? Do you see it's going to be brought into mainstream?
Yes, I think the what I see right, especially because of COVID, probably there is a lot more focus on, especially recovery, rehabilitation. I can see a lot of interest here. And the reason I very much see that we have a place in this movement is very simple. It's measurable.
Yeah.
So when people are talking about breathing, normally it's something they cannot wrap their head around. Like, okay, breathing, explain to me. But when we tell them, and it's always a little magic when somebody's measure. You ask the 4 questions. You measure the bolt score. So it's, let's say, 15, right? And then at 15, if it's a woman, we exactly know that most likely cold hands and foot.
Yeah.
Most likely
feeling
snoring,
tense.
Exactly, and most likely around the menstrual cycle, they have possibly more pain, but definitely more tense.
Yes.
And then when you tell them this after just a number, like, okay, so according to your number, I think this is what your problem is.
Yeah.
And they're like, how did you know that?
Yeah. Yes.
So I think that's very eye-opening when they start to see that the symptoms they carry for some 20 years, actually the big part, and I'm not saying just this part, but the big part of it is actually breathing related and could be improved greatly in a couple of weeks.
Yes.
Without any medication.
Yes. I agree. I think the measurement is very important. And also an understanding of breathing from a number of different dimensions, not just focusing in on one aspect of it. You brought together the biochemistry, the biomechanics, you're tying that in with breathing. We were talking about breath holds. We were talking about influencing the autonomic nervous system, stressing it when we want to, but also down-regulating it when we want to as well. You spoke about sleep. Like, surely these are the major functions that are absolutely necessary and states necessary, not just for sporting ability, but for overall quality of life. Yeah,
I agree. And one thing, I'm really thankful for your work, because again, if you're not writing all these books, then most likely most of us would never hear about it. And so that's pretty good.
Let's see the next one that's coming out.
I know you will not comment on this. It's enough I say this.
Because I think it's a really important topic. And this is focus, concentration, and attention span. And again, society has demanded that we can achieve these states, but nobody has really taught us how. The warriors of old had it. They understood focus. They understood that mental agility, to be completely immersed in the present moment, almost during combat, that everything slows down, that they can read their opponent. And sometimes I feel it's been lost, but maybe it's time to get back to basics.
I just had an opportunity to have a small interview with three Olympians. And one of them, I was working for Under Armour for a project, so I could sit down with these three legends, and a world champion in swimming, two times Olympic champion in fencing, and a European champion in judo. So I could pick their brain, and they recorded it, so now it's a program. And then I asked them, what are they doing before the day of the game? And it was very interesting. I mean, all three of them were talking about breathing exercises.
Wow.
They all three mentioned, and one of them has a PhD from psychology, so that's pretty cool, the fencer guy. So it's pretty amazing.
Yes.
But they all mentioned that they try to completely get out from the game type of mindset, and they playing cards, they reading some very easy literature. If they can, they play some snooker because that's what they make them happy and joyful.
Yes.
But nothing about their own sport, and some breathing exercises, and that's it. They try to sleep as good as possible.
Yes. Yes.
And that was very eye-opening. And we try to show people that if these three people are using these techniques, probably you should too.
Yes.
Like as an average person.
And again, can you imagine it if you were constantly thinking about the event all day, every moment before, the day before the event, you'd build it into something so big that it would scare the life out of you. And that's where the mind, that's when the mind is defeating. It's the mind can help us or it can sabotage us. And for many people, it sabotages their ability.
And there's one more thing. I'm sorry to say that, but many times they tell them, and they think when they say this, they solve the problem. They tell them just, why don't you meditate? Yes. And they try. I asked all of those people, why don't you meditate? And say, I tried, but I cannot really comprehend what is meditation. Because the moment I'm trying to not think of anything, I'm thinking of something, and that pissed me off. That's what they told me. Yes. It's like at the end, I'm so angry that I just leave it like that.
Yeah. Like I think meditation is wonderful, but I think there's a role in terms of calming the central nervous system for people who find meditation difficult. And also, can you adequately meditate if your body is in a state of fight or flight? If the respiratory physiology is off, if your sleep is off, you have agitation of the mind, and meditation isn't going to fix that. So let's go back to the hierarchy of needs in terms of looking at deep sleep is fundamental, breathing and functional breathing, and then we can bring in mind and body aware. It's been a pleasure, Peter, and I think, as I agree with Daniel, some great nuggets of information there. And Daniel as well, thanks so much for joining us. So guys, so Peter, how can people make contact with you?
Well, most of the info. Yeah, go ahead.
You're an Oxygen Advantage Master Instructor as well. So Peter gives training in Hungary in Oxygen Advantage and also in the Buteyko method. And this man has many talents in terms of your other disciplines is Krav-Maga and StrongFirst.
Yes, sir.
And for people to reach out to you.
Especially this part I will show to my teenager kids, okay? So they will have a pretty high opinion on me. Now, so if you try to reach me, I mean, they can reach me through your website, any of your website, because I have my bio there and my email address. All the rest of the information is all in Hungarian. So for most people who are listening this probably and speaking English and not Hungarian as a second language, probably they will not benefit from it.
That's great. It's been a pleasure. Thanks very much, guys.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks.